What's up, Metal Brethren? Scott Tannic 1 coming at you again live from the dungeon with part 5 of the Danzig Discography review. Now, before I really get into Danzig 4 album, I really want to kind of mention that this is the last outing with the original lineup and Rick Rubin as the producer. After this, Danzig parted ways with, I think, is the best incarnation of his band, and he had some legal problems with Rick Rubin and parted ways with him. That being said, the last offering by the classic Danzig lineup on all spheres of the Danzig solo band's early years, Danzig 4, or also known as Danzig 4P, whichever you want to call it. Now, before I really get into the tracks, this album I think is probably one of the better produced, a little bit more of a mainstream sounding Danzig album, especially for the earlier years of the band. But then again, I think it's kind of lacking. Go ahead and get into some standout tracks on here, which is Brand New God, Going Down to Die, Until You Call on the Dark, Dominion, Bringer of Death. One of my personal favorites on here, Son of the Morning Star, I Don't Mind the Pain, and Stalker Song. Um, Besides those tracks I mentioned, there's a lot of filler tracks on this one. There's also, if you got the CD of this, it's got like 99 tracks on it. After the 12th track, you get into a bunch of just blank tracks, and then it goes into like an invocation. I think that's what it's called, invocation, and it's kind of like a funeral sounding with organs, and it's just them talking about it like a demonic invocation. Honestly, Danzig 4 is kind of it's kind of a letdown for it being the last breath of the classic lineup. You could tell Danzig was starting to get a little bit burnt out with the classic lineup when it comes to this disc, but there's some really great tracks on it. I forget what the legal issue that he had with Rick Rubin was. I know it really had a parting of the ways. Definitely put a sour taste in Glenn's mouth when it comes to even talking about Rick Rubin. It was also the last album on the Deaf American label. After this, Glenn kind of jumped around from label to label until he eventually started distributing on his own label. I believe nowadays he's on Nuclear Blast's label, which is really awesome. I'm really excited about that. I love a lot of the roster that's on the Nuclear Blast label. So them adding Glenn Danzig, Glenn Danzig and his solo band in its current incarnation, I think is great. It's only going to strengthen the lineup of the Nuclear Blast label. But anyway, that we'll get into later on. Going to go ahead and rate Danzig 4 for you. Honestly, Danzig 4, it's got some really great tracks on it, but it's not a 5-star album. I'm going to go ahead and give it a generous 4 out of 5. I kind of missed this lineup, to be honest. You could tell with this record, like I said previously, they definitely seemed like Glenn was really getting burnt out of this lineup. I don't understand why. I think Chuck Biscuits was definitely one of the better drummers he ever had. I love John Christ's guitar sound. And Eerie Von, he had such a history with Eerie Von. It's kind of weird why he parted ways with him. He brought him over from Sam Hain. It was the only way he would do this, honestly, if I remember correctly, in the history of Danzig. That the only way he was going to do Rick Rubin's idea of his supergroup was if he could bring over Eerie Von. Loyalty to his friend, I really dig that about him. I don't know why he parted ways with Eerie, but you know what? Eerie, if you're out there, you were a great bass player, man. I hope you come back stronger than ever, better than ever. There it is, Danzig 4. 4 out of 5. Go ahead and check it out. It's definitely worth your money. You could probably get it discounted somewhere, but that's it. That's the end of the classic era Danzig discography. We're going to keep on going with this. See you in the next vid. Go ahead and let me know what your opinions are on this so far. Hit me up down in the comments. like, subscribe, whatever you want to do. Later on, metal brethren.